I would love to have a recording.
And I'm sure some more people will trickle in. But first of all, welcome and thank you very much for making the time. We're very excited to have you. My name is Konstantin Popovich. I go by KP, and I'm the New York City chapter lead for Conscious Capitalism. And I would like to welcome you. And we have a terrific webinar that includes some speak time, but then also some reflection time for all of you. I will introduce our guest Terri in a second, but before I do that and I hand over to her, I wanted to just introduce Conscious Capitalism to those who may be new to the movement. Yeah, so we're the New York City chapter of a movement that is at least nationwide in the US, actually becoming global more and more. And it was started about 12 years ago through a collaboration of a couple of academic and practitioner thought leaders. Here you see two of the co-founders, Raj Sisodia and John Mackey, who's actually former co-CEO of Whole Foods. And they said there must be a better way to think about capitalism, right? So this movement is very pro-capitalism, but we're actually thinking about there must be a better way to do capitalism. So what does that mean actually, right? Next slide. So what it means is, first of all, believing that business is a force for good. That is our core belief. And as such, the mission is to reshape the purpose and the practice of capitalism. And reshaping the practice of capitalism means that we're looking at the how. What are concrete steps, concrete tips on how to do that? And that is exactly what Terri will answer in our webinar today. Just to quickly give you an overview of what are the four tenets: purpose, stakeholder, orientation, conscious culture, and conscious leadership. Next. Just to ground everything in purpose, that is the number one starting point for everybody. If your company doesn't have a purpose, then let's go back to square one. The other three tenets emit from there. The next one is stakeholder orientation. And this is really about saying it's not just about investors. It is about all our stakeholders, with the employees maybe being the most important stakeholders. Now, obviously, this starts with leadership. So conscious leadership is the next pillar. And this is where we see our mission. We want to educate, inspire, and bring together conscious leaders like you all that are joining us today. And then finally, if the conscious leader does its job right, it permeates through the organization. It reflects in the practices and the values and the principles, and that ultimately creates a culture. We will touch upon all of these elements as we go through the webinar. And then just a quick announcement for those who are in the New York City metro area. Please mark your calendar already. Official information is going out in about a week. On May 1st, from 6 to 8, we will have an in-person event in Chelsea Market featuring no other than one of the co-founders, Raj, who will talk about one of his core management principles, which is leading with love. So it should be a very interesting conversation. And for those who are in the New York City metro area, we will make sure to also send you an invite. And with that, I would like to introduce Terri Maxwell, CEO of ShiftCo. And so she's been at this for a long time, and she's looked at it also from a data perspective. So what we're sharing today is actually foundational data that will help you make the right decisions. And that is what we call the conscious business forecast. We will have a presentation. Terri will present for about half an hour, and then we would like to invite you for a minute to reflect on what you saw. And then we'll get into breakout rooms and have a conversation, because our job is not just to provide information and insights and so on, but we want actually to trigger action. And the way we trigger action is through reflection and conversation. So let's make sure to make that as productive as possible. But let's first get started. Terri, welcome, and thank you for doing this for us. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing about the Conscious Business Forecast.
Thank you, KP, and thank you to your chapter, and thank you for the work that you do to move this wonderful thing called conscious capitalism forward. Thank you for joining today. My company's purpose is to revolutionize the way brands grow. What you're going to hear today is that
I had to register. So I actually went to your link in the general channel in Slack.
I'm getting some somebody, I don't know if we can mute Kathy. So my company's purpose is to revolutionize the way brands grow. And what you're going to hear today is, starting the second half of this year, is probably one of the most important and the biggest opportunities for conscious capitalism that I've seen in the last 15 years since I've been affiliated with the movement. During that time, I've built a portfolio of conscious companies. I've studied conscious business trends. And with the recent political changes and their impact on global business, I dug into the data deeper to understand what the future of conscious business holds. And I'll share that research with you today. In addition to starting a portfolio of conscious brands, several clients asked me to create ShiftCo to train conscious leaders how to grow their business and maximize their impact. And we did that in 2020. And at the end of 2024, 85.7% of the businesses using our platform had doubled in size. And our belief is, when you double a business, you triple its impact. Now, what led me to doing this work is very germane to the forecast. In addition to being president of an internet subsidiary whose parent went public on NASDAQ in 1999, I'm older than I look. I'm turning 60 this year. I can't believe it. In addition to that IPO, I've had multiple business exits, and I'll come back to that internet startup in a minute because it's very important to what's occurring today. But in 2009, I sold my last business and I started over with this crazy idea that there had to be a way to use my business growth skills to do good and make money. So I created Share on Purpose Inc., which is our holding company. It's kind of like a purposeful Shark Tank. And we do two things. We have a speculator fund that invests in purposeful brands. An example of that is Izzy, or Izzy is the first zero waste makeup and skincare line. 100% zero waste, complete line of makeup and skincare, amazing product. So that's an example of an investment that we've made. We also have what we call the cultivator, and the cultivator creates conscious companies that have disruptive business models. To date, we've created 5 companies, with ShiftCo being number 5, which is very exciting. And so that kind of sums up the background that I have. In today's session, we're going to cover 3 things. First is, will conscious business trends, sustainability, equality, human capital, expand or retract? I think that's very important for us to know. The second, and we have to ask this question, is, what does the excessive conflict and drama mean? Things are heating up and they're getting more intense every day. And as you'll see, there is a very good reason for this. And that reason is setting the stage for conscious capitalism and value-based business models to explode the second half of this year. Third, and most importantly, and what the breakouts will cover, is what can we do differently now to increase the success of our enterprise? And right now, ShiftCo is partnering with organizations to bring these insights and to support you in taking advantages of the changes so that you can grow your good. To understand what the data is telling us, I want to describe what I call value-based business models, which includes companies who practice conscious capitalism, as well as companies that focus on stakeholder capitalism, and companies who've adopted a public benefit structure, as well as social impact models. You see that I believe that conscious business is a business model as much as it is a movement. And I just want you to put a pin in that. Conscious businesses, conscious capitalism, I believe, is a business model as much as it is a movement. And there are 3 characteristics that distinguish value-based business models, such as conscious capitalism. The last time I saw this big of a business model shift was in 1995, when I left a secure corporate position to chase what I believed was a revolutionary business model shift, the internet. Again, I'm older than I look. At that time, everyone thought the internet was dangerous, it would be harmful to business. And just like today, there was a lot of conflict and cynicism about the internet, which seems crazy now. But even in 1995, I could see how the internet would revolutionize the way business was done. And I knew that the internet would create an entirely new business model, a new way to do business altogether, which of course it did. Today, less than 45% of shoppers prefer in-store purchases versus online, and that is growing. Online purchases are growing more and more every day. Well, our little internet company went public on NASDAQ in 1999, which was the tipping point of the internet's adoption. And I personally rode the wave of the early resistance and fighting over the internet. And then I saw its rapid adoption. And I saw that it did truly transform business, most of it for good. And what I believe, and what you'll hear in this Conscious Business Forecast, is where we are with values-based business models is at the same conscious business tipping point. And it is the greatest opportunity for anyone that believes in conscious capitalism principles. This is the greatest opportunity that we have. Value-based business models can be distinguished by three characteristics. The first is how they approach their product. Now, I'm going to talk about founders, but this is true with conscious businesses of all size. I'll go back to Whole Foods. Whereas traditional businesses approach their product and say, will someone buy this widget that I have? A conscious company, such as Whole Foods, says, will this solve a problem? Will it make it easier for consumers to have access to food that is good for them? Now, an example of that is the founder of Your Izzy. He wanted a way to create a makeup line that wouldn't destroy the planet with plastics and chemicals. So he invented the first zero-waste makeup and skincare line to bring high-quality makeup to consumers. He wasn't innovating it to make money. He was looking for a way to solve the personal care product waste that destroys the environment. The second characteristic of a value-based business model is pricing. Whereas a traditional business approaches pricing from the standpoint of what will someone pay, a conscious business asks, how much is it worth? Choosing first to focus on value over greed. Value-based business models are priced based on value. And that is one of the reasons why conscious brands will excel in the recession that is surely approaching, because we remain focused on value. But it's also where a lot of the conflict is coming from. More on that in a minute. And the third characteristic of a value-based business model is how the business views success. A traditional business approaches success from the standpoint of how much money can we make, whereas a conscious business asks, how much is it worth and how much value that we can provide, and can we make a difference? Choosing to focus on value over greed. Now, to understand what value-based business model trends have to do with what's happening right now, I want to take us back to the history of conscious business. From what I can tell, one of the first and most successful conscious brands was Patagonia, which started in 1973. Ben & Jerry's started in 1978, Whole Foods in 1980, and then Tom's Shoes in 2006, which is when the get-give pricing model took hold, which is a very effective value-based pricing model. And when you hear about conscious capitalism and stakeholder capitalism, these are some of the brands that are talked about. But there are a lot of others. A brand that I love that is a perfect example of a value-based business model is Warby Parker. Probably one of the most successful brands focused on its commitment to stakeholder capitalism. Warby Parker specifically created a business model to make and sell eyeglasses. They make a better product for less money. And then, of course, there's Bombas, another social impact brand that uses get-give as the core pricing model. So these are all brands that we've heard of, right? Well, what you might not realize is today, almost 50% of all companies that are created are formed using a value-based business model. They are started to focus simultaneously on purpose and profit, almost 50%. And I'm going to give you the statistic and where that statistic comes from. Now, this brings me back to the internet and why there's so much drama and conflict today. All trends follow a predictable pattern. I saw and lived this in 1995 when I first realized the internet could become a revolutionary new way to do business. For me to see the internet as a new disruptive business model meant that there were decades of development in technology and its application that occurred before I could see it. The same is true for values-based business models and, in particular, conscious capitalism. Let me show you what I mean. When a new trend or business model is introduced, less than 3% adopt it. I remember in 1992 getting those AOL CDs in the mail offering this thing called the internet. And I know I'm really showing my age here. And I signed on and I was fascinated with it as a consumer. At the time, all you could do was send messages and join chat rooms and search for things. But then I started to see businesses offering promotions online via AOL. And then I saw the first internet ad, which was on AOL. And I was like, this is interesting. I was a marketer, right? And the corporation I worked for at the time, which was an educational software company, had started to work on an internet-based educational software project. But when they presented it, they talked about how far behind they were on leveraging the internet from their competitors. So not wanting to miss this trend, I left that company, a very secure position, and went to work for an internet startup in 1995. Well, today I see the same thing, and the data that I'm going to present in the research is going to show you that the same thing is occurring. It's a revolutionary shift for value-based business models. We do not need to be on the defensive. It is time to go on the offensive. And here's how I know that to be true. Between 1970 and 2020, that was the introduction phase of conscious and value-based business models. Most projections were that 3 to 4% of businesses had adopted those principles. The second phase of any adoption curve is growth. That's when major trends start to take hold and things really start to change. Typically, there's a 14 to 18% adoption rate during this phase, but that's when the majority of the innovation occurs. Think about the innovation that has occurred since 2020 in conscious business. I'm an investor. I have more investment options than I can even imagine, and they're all innovative, conscious business models based on value. And that seemed to start between the 2020 and 2021 period, even with COVID. In a minute, I'm going to show you data that supports that assumption. The third phase is maturity, and that's when the rest of the world adapts and things change for good. This is typically when you see an adoption rate of about 60%. The final phase is decline, which is typically characterized by a replacement for whatever the trend was. And I think for internet technology, AI is replacing the way we do business via the internet. So I think the internet is in that last phase. But let's go back to the period where we are for conscious and values-based business models. That little red box represents what's known as the chasm. And it is in the chasm when you see the most resistance to a trend. I'll talk a lot more about that in a minute because that is what explains why there's so much drama today. So for a trend to revolutionize an industry or the world, 3 things must simultaneously exist, and this is known as convergence. I saw convergence with the internet. I saw it with mobile telephony. I'm now seeing the exact same thing with values-based business models. First is entrepreneurs and businesses must accept the trend. That's because they provide the majority of innovation in those first early stages, in the beginning when it's introduced and in the growth phase where we are right now. And that's what ensures that the trend becomes a reality. Second is consumer behavior must change because consumers power the economic influence of a trend. When consumers get behind a trend, mobile telephony, internet, it usually starts to hit the growth phase, and that's when you see adoption grow significantly. Third, and interesting, is technology and support system must adapt and provide a foundation for the trend to scale beyond early adopters. I want to take a look at these three elements that are converging around conscious and values-based business models, starting first with entrepreneurship and business. This will set the stage to explain why there's so much conflict at this very moment, and that we're crossing the chasm from the old way of doing business based on greed to the new way of doing business based on core values. So let's start first with business. This is a study from Global Entrepreneurship Monitor 2024 study. Global Entrepreneurship, or what's known as GEM, is the world's foremost study of entrepreneurship since 1999. I've been following them for the last decade, and they measure a lot of things: gender, race, age, as well as measuring how different countries support entrepreneurs with tax and legislative policies. One of the things that they started measuring out of the blue in 2019 was the founder's motivation for starting a business. The blue line represents that the reason someone started a business was to make a difference. The orange line represents the founder's reason as building great wealth or very high income. Global Entrepreneurship Monitor began to see that there was a shift in the reason and the origination of a business away from building great wealth to making a difference in the world. And right now, almost 50% of US and Canadian founders reported that their motivation for starting their business, the primary purpose, was to make a difference in the world, in addition to earning good income, because they're not mutually exclusive. So think about that. The majority of businesses are now starting their business to make a difference. People like Izzy that wanted to innovate the way personal care products don't pollute the internet. I mean, promote the world, pollute the world. And this is happening across all countries. Almost all countries are seeing the same shift. I believe it's happening because the next generation of business owners, millennials, are very eco-conscious. But don't just take that one study. Let me show you a few more examples. The next is from a survey from CEO Today magazine, which represents businesses 100 million down to 1 million. And they said that sustainability and ethical business practices are a top 10 business trend. Fast Company said there's a growing trend of eco-conscious branding, businesses that are authentically aligning with sustainability. They said, Fast Company said, that eco-conscious branding has evolved from a trend to a core value, which means we're definitely in that second phase where things are really going to start to grow. Another data point that's relevant is Inc. magazine said sustainable development and moral business practices are a top 5 business trend. And then PricewaterhouseCoopers said that consumers are willing to pay almost a 10% sustainability premium, even as the cost of living and inflationary concerns have heated up. This was from their 2024 Voice of the Consumer survey. From here, after we've looked at entrepreneur and business, I want to shift over to consumer trends, because that is the second area of convergence that must occur for a trend to become mainstream, and that's consumer behavior. Remember those AOL CDs that I referenced? When my neighbors and friends started asking me for my AOL address, it wasn't called an email address back then, it was called an AOL address. I knew that consumer adoption had taken root. So let's see where we are with consumer behavior as it relates to conscious and values-based business models. Conscious consumers. First data point is TD Bank's annual consumer spending index. What percent of shoppers consider themselves conscious? 58%, according to TD Bank's. Their annual consumer spending research said that sentiment is even more prevalent amongst millennials, that 58% of all consumers, but for millennials, it's 62% said that they're conscious about where they shop, the products they buy, prioritizing local, sustainable, and ethically sourced products. 62% of the millennial generation, which will power the economy in the next decade, 62% of them are aware and are making conscious decisions when purchasing products. There's another study that I've been following for 11 years, and that's from Good Must Grow. One of the core components of this study is that conscious is what he calls the Conscious Consumer Spending Index. This index summarizes the importance that consumers place on purchasing from socially responsible companies. You can see that it was already on a pretty good trend, and then we saw a dip because during the COVID period, everything changed, but it spiked up after COVID, and then it leveled off again during the inflation period that we all have felt. And then it spiked up again in 2023. And although it's down just a little bit, in large part, that's because inflation has been sustained for so long, and also because we're in such turmoil that people aren't really sure what to do. And I prefer to look at data not just annually, but over a 5-year period. 3 of the last 4 years, it was above 50%. And this study validates what the TD Bank study said. So that means that more than 50% of consumers are making decisions, even when it costs them a little bit more to purchase conscious products. Another segment from the Good Must Grow study is earth-friendly practices, which have held steady. So if they're purchasing green, you can see that on the green line. If they reduce their consumption in some way, that's the purple line. And you can see from this research that earth-friendly practices are also holding steady in spite of the pressure that we all have felt in our wallet with inflation. That brings me to the third area. And for a trend to really take root and transform the world and transform business in this case, these aspects need to converge together and to become mainstream. And the third component is technology and support systems. For a trend to be sustained, technology innovation must support and enable its expansion so it can become mainstream. When the trend is gaining ground, technology adapts and significantly increases the speed of innovation and also speeds up the adoption. That's why the first phase takes so long. And then the second phase, where it really starts to grow, happens a lot faster, usually about 5 to 10 years. And then boom, 60% adoption on the other side of that. It's because of technology. Technology adds efficiency, speed, knowledge access, the ability to analyze data, and collaboration. Interestingly enough, AI is a great example of this. And although it's a little early to tell how it will affect business, I do believe that it is going to speed up the adoption of conscious and values-based business models. And I'll share some tips on how to think about that when we get to that in part of the forecast. Now, unlike when I started my conscious and purposeful journey back in 2009, today there is incredible support for conscious businesses to help them shape their values-based business model. And keep in mind, I believe that conscious capitalism is more than a movement. It is absolutely a movement. I've been proud to be associated with it for 2 decades now, but it's bigger than that. It is a business model. And when I became aware of conscious capitalism in 2010, a former client and good friend of mine, Carrie Freeman Parsons, told me about it. And as you know, conscious capitalism is focused on reshaping the perception of capitalism, which is very timely right now. And of course, there's also B Lab. They are focused on certification of conscious brands, and they created what's called the B Impact Assessment to help companies measure and improve how they adhere to values-based business models, or what they call stakeholder capitalism. And of course, ShiftCo, which is focused on growing conscious companies. Our belief is that we want to prove that conscious and values-based business models are more profitable, more scalable, and more sustainable. And the way to prove that is to ensure that conscious brands are thriving and making a bigger impact. And my motto is, when you double a conscious business, you triple its impact. But it's not just the 3 of us. Today, there are thousands of tools, systems, groups, and communities supporting conscious and eco-friendly businesses. So as you can see, entrepreneurs and businesses have adopted values-based business models. Consumers have adopted purchasing habits and are willing to pay a slight premium. And there is now major technological and support systems for this new way of doing business to become more prevalent. Which brings me back to why there is so much conflict in our country and in the world. The data clearly supports that conscious business trends, sustainability, equality, human capital, have and will continue to expand. Which begs the question, if that's true, why is there so much conflict? Why are we feeling so much resistance? It's all because of what's known as the chasm. Let me show you what I mean by that. From eons, from history and business history, decades and centuries, all meaningful change is preceded by massive conflict. As those ALCDs were gaining ground and they were hitting, anybody that had a household income above $50,000 got an AOLCD. Governments started fighting over how the internet would be regulated and taxed. Secular and religious groups started attacking the internet and saying it would become the death of our society. And if you're in your 60s like me, you'll remember that. And I remember that. I remember my church, it's talking about how evil the internet was in 1995. And I'm looking at it and going, this is a revolutionary business model. What are you saying? Well, one of my favorite quotes is from John Danforth. He was nominated under George W. Bush as the 4th U.S. ambassador to United Nations. And I remember hearing him speak at a conference during this time where we were discussing internet-based commerce models. And this was around 1995. And I was reminded recently of his talk. And he said, the loudest voices we hear are those that advocate conflict and divisiveness, because they're trying to steer you away from where the winds are blowing, and they're trying to go back to the old way of doing things. The internet was kind of like letting the genie out of the bottle. And I believe the same thing is true for conscious and values-based business model. The genie is out of the bottle. So what is this conflict about? Folks, it is about change. If you believe that construct, that all meaningful change is preceded by conflict, what's happening right now is more businesses are being created to make a difference, and they are leveraging values-based business models. More consumers are choosing to support eco-friendly, sustainable, diverse, and equity-focused practices, and frankly, moral business practices. And the old way of business doesn't like this. Think about it. The old way of doing business is resisting conscious and values-based business models. And you see, when businesses start to think differently about human capital and how people are treated, it threatens the old way of doing business. When businesses prioritize a values-based approach, it threatens the old shareholder-driven mode of profit at all costs. Just look at the layoffs that are being normalized while corporate profits have been at record highs. The old way of doing business wants to let businesses prioritize profits and be unregulated and unchecked. The old way of doing business, the almost authoritarian way of doing business, doesn't like conscious capitalism. It doesn't like stakeholder capitalism. It doesn't like this values-based business models, and it doesn't like prioritizing people alongside profits. It doesn't like prioritizing planet alongside the kind of greed that destroys the planet. So what we're experiencing is the chasm, and it shows up right as a new trend is gaining ground. I saw this in 1995 and 1996 as people were picketing, resisting the internet. And then just a few years later, as we were having our IPO, the internet was the darling of Wall Street, and churches were getting on board and building websites and looking at ways that they could interface with their congregation. It was fascinating. And it became clear that the change had crossed the chasm and we would never go back. What we are experiencing right now, the conflict and drama today, is mostly due to the resistance of a better business model, one that balances people, planet, purpose, and profit, one that values diversity, inclusion, and belonging, one that understands the values that all stakeholders have and sees businesses as a force for good rather than a race towards greed. The conflict and drama is loud, but it is not real. The conflict tells me that things are actually working, even though it feels hard. And the data behind that assumption tells a much different story. And this data is going to blow your mind, because this explains why the old way of doing business is fighting the fact that the genie is already out of the bottle. It's already been proven that conscious businesses and conscious and values-based business model is a better way to do business. This is from the end of 2024 from McKinsey. At the time that they did this study, they said 67% of companies had targeted talent programs for diverse talent. 70% of companies had supplier diversity programs. Now, we all know that DEI is a hot button right now, right? But get this, in that study, and look it up, it's fascinating, what they found, McKinsey, is that organizations in the top quartile for gender diversity had a 25% likelihood of financially outperforming their peers. So what that data point means is companies that value and promote gender diversity in their management ranks have a 25% likelihood of financially outperforming their peers. Organizations in the top quartile for ethnic diversity have a 36% likelihood of financial outperformance. Think about that. So there's all this conflict about DEI, but the data, and this isn't the only study, by the way, says that gender and ethnic diverse companies outperform their peers. In fact, another data point they listed is diverse companies have a 2.5x higher cash flow per employee. Cash is king, folks, and diverse companies create more cash. Inclusive teams, they also found, are 35% more productive. Diverse teams make better decisions 87% of the time. Do you think the old way of doing business likes this kind of proof? Of course not. So the attack on DEI is as much about greed and control and going back to the old way of doing business as it is about racism and gender parity. Again, the conflict and drama is loud. It is not real. The data tells a very different story. There's also another piece of data that explains why there's so much conflict right now. This one is kind of good news and bad news, and it's going to kind of hit home for most of us. Trust is at an all-time low. This is a very important study to frame how you lead your business, and it's from a global organization called OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and it's tracked trust for a long time. Trust in government leaders, business leaders, and the media. And basically, trust is at an all-time low. This is a snapshot from 2021 to 2025. The question they ask, and this is the one that just kind of tears my heart open, is the fear of whether or not leaders were lying. They looked at government, business, journalists, and reporters. Look at the jump in 2025 for government leaders, business leaders, and journalists and reporters. The vast majority of people are afraid they're being lied to. And I want to particularly highlight business leaders, which is us, because this report says the vast majority of people, and again, this was a global study, believe that the majority of business leaders purposely mislead people, and they do it intentionally. And that is a scary metric, that the vast majority of people globally think that business leaders are purposely misleading people, and that purposely word means that they're doing it intentionally and they're doing it egregiously. And that is sad, but it is also why our work matters. We have the opportunity to change this. And we'll be talking about that in the last section in the breakout, because we can differentiate our business based on trust. So if you want to grow your business and grow your enterprise, you and your leadership team, it's real simple. become even more trustworthy. There's another facet of trust to explain why the conflict is getting worse, not better. It also is a little hard to stomach, but it's important for us to understand. For this one, I want to share a systemic study from Our World in Data. They've tracked the decline in trust in the US since 1972. And what's interesting is when you look at one of the more recent studies, they show trust by country. The US has a 37% trust rating versus Denmark, which was the highest, at 74%. Think about some of the conflict right now in our administration attacking some of the European countries. Here's why. Because not only are their economies growing and thriving based on trust, but they're in direct values conflict with what is being purported from many places in our country. I want to go further into this because it's germane to where to go from here. This is from the Edelman Trust Barometer, and this indicates the amount of distrust that has transformed into grievance. Grievance is when people have an axe to grind. They're mad, they're angry, they're raging on social media, they're putting negative reviews, they're fighting back. 61% of respondents said that they have moderate or high sense of grievance today than they did even a year ago. And grievance culturally creates more distrust. Edelman referred to it as a trust penalty. The penalty means that our society begins to normalize aggressive action, and we can see this everywhere. A current example is the Tesla backlash. And whether or not you agree with what's happening or not, people are cheering on people that are attacking Tesla dealerships. Again, that's because the trust is transformed into grievance. I want to isolate business because we scored 42% on high grievance. What that means is customers, employees, vendors, and everyday people don't trust businesses, and that mistrust has been transformed into grievances, which creates more mistrust. And high-profile media cases, many in your area, have showcased some of these challenges, and it's heartbreaking to watch. Edelman's study specifically said the crisis of grievance puts pressure on trust, meaning it will get worse before it gets better. But it also creates an opportunity for us as conscious business leaders to step up our game. Rather than looking at the world as a dumpster fire, I want us to look at it from a lens of being the change we want to see, which brings me to the reason that we're here together today. This presentation is just a sampling of the data contained in a much larger conscious business forecast that will be released in April. It will also contain some new studies since the new US administration took root. And it also will explain why there's so much conflict and drama. Most of it boils down to the reality that values-based business models are growing in popularity, and they are a better way to do business, and that the old way of doing business is fighting like crazy to stop its ultimate adoption. That is the main takeaway. The drama and conflict is the old way of doing business, fighting against values and conscious business models. Remember, I think of them as a business model, and they are better ways of doing business, but they don't necessarily support a greed-based shareholder money at all cost approach. So what can we do differently now to increase success? Better yet, how can we take advantage of these trends and use business as a force for good to push past the chasm through the growth phase and into full-scale adoption of values-based business models? Well, we can do 5 things, and we'll be breaking out to discuss these a little bit later. And I want you, as you're thinking about these 5 things, to not think about just surviving the chaotic world, but to think about growing and thriving and taking advantage of this opportunity. The second half of 2025 and 2026 and 2027 is the best time for conscious businesses to thrive, because the disparity between what's happening is going to be so stark that people will recognize the difference. So let's go through these 5 things. The first is double down on doing good. So number one thing that you can do, Don't allow yourself to be on your heels. Double down on doing good. And I'll talk more about what that means in a minute. The second is, remember, you get what you focus on. My grandfather taught me at a very early age, you get what you focus on. So we have to really be careful where we're focused. Third is grow your good. This is the time to tell your story and grow and talk about the good that you're doing. Fourth is choose your battles, because there are a lot of battles out there. And fifth is get clear and calm every day. So let's go through these, and then we'll break out and talk about them in more detail, starting first with doubling down on doing good. If you're listening to this presentation, you're already committed to using business to make an impact, and you also want to build something profitable that also makes the world better. Double down on that. The world needs us right now, and I am confident, 100% confident, that conscious business models and conscious business-based innovation will be the driving force of positive change going forward, period. It has to be. The data overwhelmingly supports that this way of doing business is better for the people, for the planet, for profit, as you saw in the McKinsey study, for success, and for society as a whole. So here's the thing. Since trust is low, use that to your advantage. Here are some of the things that you can do to double down on doing good. Offer guarantees, offer low risk pricing or performance models. A clear outward sign of a values-based business model is that they offer a guarantee, or their pricing is low risk, which means you don't have to pay for everything up front, or they offer some type of a performance model. So think about how you can innovate your pricing model to take advantage of the fact that there's so much distrust. And when you put something out there and you create a guarantee or a low risk or performance pricing model, that communicates that you're trustworthy. The second is focusing on value and building relationships. Focus your marketing not on getting people to buy, but on serving them until they are ready to buy. And this isn't about giving away things for free, but rather approaching how you market to emphasize the building of a relationship. Speak more about the problems that you solve and the value you provide rather than who you are and what you do. And that's a very important thing that we've proven when we've helped our members communicate how they talk about what they do and migrate away from who they are and what they do and talk more about the problems they solve and the value they provide. Their businesses grow. So that's like a, for sure you can do that. Third is showcase authentic reviews. This is super important right now because of fake news and fake reviews. For example, whenever I see a business marketing something that sounds too good to be true, I go to Trustpilot and I check them out. The vast majority of time, the reviews on Trustpilot are horrible. So consider how you can make your reviews more visible and also make them as authentic as possible. And fourth is modify your actual business model to build trust. This is a great time to rethink your company values, publish an annual or biannual impact report, donate to nonprofits in a give-get who are being hurt in this backlash that's occurring. Think about ways that you can collaborate with your clients. Think about things like partnering with other organizations. And a great example of this is something we preach to all of the founders we work with, is to wake up every day and ask yourself this question: who do I serve and what do they need from me right now? If you can do that one thing, you will see your business flourish. Which brings me to the next suggestion: you get what you focus on. To grow a conscious company that makes an impact, you can and must learn how to focus differently. Focus is a skill that you learn. It's not necessarily something you're born with. And this skill is paramount in these times because there's so much distraction that is out there. Don't focus on the noise. Remember, it's loud, but it's not true. Be very selective what you read and what you watch. Focus on what inspires you to move forward. One of my mantras right now is to find the light and amplify it. It's easy to share negativity. It's easy to shout about the chaos, but there are a lot of good things that are happening. So remain hyper vigilant and focus on what is working. When I get down in these times that we're in, I have a little pad of paper, and at the top of the pad of paper, it says, what is working? And I'll just stop and I'll make a list of what is working. I'll be grateful for clients where we're having an impact, and I'll be grateful for team members. I'll be grateful for partnerships like Conscious Capitalism New York. And so focus on what is working. Find the people that are doing good and amplify their work. And finally, every truly conscious business is always in the process of getting better. So don't worry about perfection. Just focus on incremental improvement. The third suggestion, which is one of my favorites because of my DNA for growing companies, is to grow your good. My research has demonstrated that when a conscious business doubles in size, they triple their impact. So think about the power of that. We're all here to make a bigger impact. We got to double our business for that impact to really be sustainable. So here are a few things that you can do to double your business and grow your good. First and foremost is 3x the awareness of your business. Most conscious brands are humble and they're focused on taking care of their customers, and they don't spend enough time ensuring that more of their target market knows about their good work. So we need 3 times more of your target market to be aware of your business. And by the way, all conscious businesses need to 3x their awareness. They need 3 times more awareness than they have today. So grow brand awareness authentically and talk about the good that you're doing, and you'll grow your good. Double your partners and collaborators and look for people that want to collaborate with you. We are stronger together. Find others that believe and look for win-win partnerships where you can grow together. And as I mentioned before, tell stories about the impact that you're making. There is a time for humility, absolutely, but you can tell your story and still be humble. The world needs this because that contrast in about 2 or 3 months is going to become so extreme. The contrast between the old way of doing business, which will crumble the economy and drastically affect our nation and world, and a more sustainable way of doing business. We need those stories of impact. It also creates positive energy cycle around your business that will help you grow in size and impact. More importantly, it also neutralizes the negativity, which brings me to strategy 4. Choose your battles carefully. With all the negativity, some people and organizations want you to fight their battles for them. So don't jump on the battle bandwagon. If you care about sustainability, fight that battle and leave the others. If diversity is what you're passionate about, fight that battle. Don't feel like you have to fight all of the battles. There are just too many. The battle that I'm fighting is to prove that conscious and values-based business model is a better way to do business. That doesn't mean that I don't care about the other battles. It means that this is my battle to fight, and I am going to give it everything I've got. So choose your battle. When I first became an entrepreneur, and this is kind of the reason why I'm so passionate about this particular one, in 2002, again, older than I look, I failed miserably for the first 2 years. 2002, 2003, 2004, I was ready to quit. And I hired a coach who gave me a very powerful assignment. She asked me to interview 10 founders and to find out what they had in common. And keep in mind, I'd been failing for 2 years. So I did. And guess what I found? The only thing those 10 founders had was perseverance. They refused to quit. So I was like, that can't be. It's got to be education. It's got to be the business they're in. It's got to be the business model. So I interviewed another 90 founders for a total of 100. The only thing they had in common is they refused to quit. And I believe, folks, that the only thing that founders have in common is we refuse to quit. So in order to do that, we have to choose our battles carefully and save our energy for perseverance. Which brings me to the last recommendation. Get clear and calm every day. If it's one thing that I know for sure, is that authenticity will win, and authenticity will drive conscious and values-based business models. Well, to be authentic, we have to get clear and calm in these rocky times. My suggestion is block a 30-minute block in the morning and a 30-minute block in the afternoon. This is what I do to breathe, meditate, go for a calming walk, make a list of what is working. And I believe this is no longer a nice to have strategy. I think it's essential for success. Your breath is one of the most powerful tools that you have. Take time to breathe, find techniques that help you relax and quiet your mind. And when your mind is quiet, ask that question: who do I serve and what do they need from me right now? Thank you so much for joining me for the summary of the Conscious Business Forecast. I hope that we can connect on LinkedIn, and if there's ever any way that I can serve you, I'm more than happy to do it. I'll turn it back over to KP and Kathy.
Unmute. Okay. Everybody, yeah, I'm good, I think. Okay. Hey, so thank you, Terri, very much for this inspiring thoughts and talk. The chat, you couldn't see this, but the chat was full of really inspiring conversation. And there's a couple of things that people are taking away. For me personally, the idea of focus and to pick your battle and the one battle that you're going to fight and not be too distracted with the others is really powerful, because that's how we can be most impactful. So we're a little bit out of time. It's 2 p.m. sharp. But for those who can stay for at least 2 or 3, 4 minutes, now would be a good moment to ask Terri any questions around what we heard.
I don't have any questions per se. I just want to say, Terri, thank you for the inspiration. It does feel sometimes like, why do I care? And why do I focus so hard on making the business model itself, the underlying ways in which we make revenue? Why am I so caring about, does it do good? But so I just want to thank you for lifting my heart today.
Double down on that.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
echo that. Terrific, terrific presentation, Terri. Thank you so much.
Yeah, full of optimism, and I think we're all walking away stronger and more motivated to go on. And with that, if there's maybe one last question before we close. Anybody?
I just love the data. I'm a data geek, and that is compelling. Thank you.
Okay,
Terri,
so-
I'll ask one quick question. Just in terms of like the ramifications of like using AI and business, in terms of like AI is so bad for the environment and so electricity and power heavy, but yet if you don't use AI, you are going to get left behind. And so there's that business to benefit contrast. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so anytime I've seen that happen, and you can see it with just about any product that starts off being bad for the environment. One of my favorites is rubber gloves. The guy that created rubber gloves for surgery did it for the right reasons, and rubber gloves were one of the biggest pollutants. And now today there are 10 companies that now have sustainable rubber gloves. So what I'm looking for and what I would look to invest in is companies that find a better, more sustainable way to do AI. Again, I think that genie is out of the bottle, but I think there's a way to make it sustainable. And I think there are companies that will find it. And that's why it's a great reason why it's time to really go on the offensive for conscious businesses, to really talk about those things. Like, AI is here to stay. How do we make it better for the environment?
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Terri, I have one more, if you don't mind. Two of the darlings, you mentioned the Whole Foods and you mentioned Container Store. They've struggled of late. So what I'm looking for, and you touch on the data, and by the way, there's a lot of it there, but what are, I'll call them more recent darlings? And I think you gave a slide of 6.
Warby Parker.
4.
Yeah.
Thank you. I need them, so I'll be on there tonight. Do you have any more data? Because if you point to Whole Foods, they're owned by Amazon, all kinds of controversy there. Container Store, love them dearly, was a manufacturer for them for 15 years. Are there others that we can focus on for, I'll call them, especially the younger generations that are coming in? I love the way you highlighted, some of the new data about that they've grown up with a feeling of doing good. What companies would they relate to that, you can
Yeah,
highlight?
Greg, I'll follow up with you and get you a list of companies that you can look at. And the one thing I would say about Whole Foods is one of the things that I heard him say on stage, what literally I just thought I almost dropped, everything and just almost fell to the floor, is he said if our legal structure had been a public benefit corporation, we would not have had to sell the business, and selling the business could be the death of the business. He literally said that from stage.
I
And
heard it
yeah,
too, and
yeah,
it's it's a dagger to my heart as a longtime entrepreneur,
yeah,
to just not have those go
yep.
to I'll call them top three. So
Yeah, Patagonia is out there. And I think that the DEI thing is causing companies like Costco to step up and say, hey, no more. And so in addition to giving you a list of companies that I would encourage you, both big and small, to follow, I would say stay tuned, because the contrast is going to be so extreme, you will not be able to miss it.
good. Love that. Thank you.
Other questions? And I'll be happy to stay as long as we can. For some reason, this went a little bit longer than I had planned. I can't help my passion for it, though, and I hope that it helped you guys in meaningful ways. But I'll be happy to answer any other questions or brainstorm in any way, and stay as long as you need.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. This is Vanessa. I'm just on audio. Go ahead and I'll maybe line up after you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Terri, just to echo what everyone shared already, of gratitude. But I was curious, just when it comes to partnerships in this capacity, what would you say that you've recognized are good policies or guidelines to kind of maintain accountability on both sides for those partnerships?
Great question. So two things on this: approach it crawl, walk, run. Too often people like, let's partner, and they jump all in and it goes crazy. Second is, I call it the ABCs of partnering. So number one is alignment. Are your values aligned, and how do you know they're aligned? Not just the goal of how we're going to do business together, but your values. B is benefit. How will you benefit, and how will I benefit? And let's make sure it's mutually beneficial, and let's work that out. This is in the crawl stage. And C is learning how to communicate effectively. Partnerships are like any relationship, and they are based on good communication. So ABC, making sure that there's alignment. B is that the mutual beneficial nature is clearly outlined. And C is really working on communication. And then approach it crawl, walk, run. Let's just start with an informal partnership and crawl. If it's successful, great, we'll take it to the next level. Maybe we'll put some type of an MOU in place or something like that. And then C, or the third stage is run, is, hey, we've got a real collaboration here. Let's really figure out how to make it more formal.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Bern, short for Bernmeister, my legal alias. And just very quickly, I'm a regular guy of at best ordinary talent, with one exception. I've got up the wazoo creativity, and I employ that in academic and entertainment projects. My foremost work is a theory on how to restructure the international monetary system. An advisor to 3 Republican presidents says that in theory, apparently this does check out so far, very preliminary. And I would like to get more involved with everyone here at Conscious Capitalism to have you check out my work and verify that it is as appears, because if that is true, it's a big if, but if that is true, that is a potential difference maker, because it shows a blueprint to get from where we are to where we want to go with many of these goals. It is just very quickly, one example is we think about education, investing in the education of workers, and there's a notion that it's being done out of the goodness of one's heart. But in actuality, the more productive worker is the better educated worker, as opposed to the illiterate or less educated worker. So there's aspects of that into it, but even more than that, it's even more fundamental about the structure of how we value money. We value money today on a concept I call quantitative concentration, how much there is, where it is, who has it. This is not the actual value of money. The true value of money is, drum roll, the net of how well it is used. That is a jaw dropper. If we can establish this truth into a structure and get it recognized, and I'm sure the whole world will want to go for that because it's in their interest to do so, that's a game changer. So thank you for the 2 minutes. I appreciate it. It was a great platform, Ms. Maxwell. I hope I will be able to follow up with you and others, and Ms. Eastwood in particular. I'd like to see if I can encroach a little bit more on your time and have 20 minutes or so to blow your mind and have you have an opportunity to verify my academic work appears to be the real deal. Thank you so much.
Vanessa?
Thank you. Actually, thank you, Bern. Some of what you touched on kind of relates to my comment / question and request for response from you, Terri. I have a conundrum as a business owner that I think a lot of other, whether we identify with conscious capitalism by name or whether we hear it and hear it described and say, oh, that's it. That's what we're doing. Okay. Thank you for the term. Conundrum related to money, related to funding, related to control is 7 years ago when I was starting my business and I sought out different potential funding sources, I had to do so with the filter of will getting an angel investor, convertible note, straight up equity, right? Will that mean sacrificing the values, the model? Even understanding that, will this be a sacrifice that in 5 years I'll look back and regret? We have done it the hard way. We've bootstrapped. We have gone into debt by, I would say, a combination of just bad luck, 18 months old and the pandemic hit, didn't want to let people go. Bad luck with PPP because of the way that was structured for growing businesses. Maybe sometimes the economic cost of a values-based business is that we have to say, well, in order to do the right thing, that's going to cost us some money. We have accumulated not horrendous amounts of debt, but we want to be debt-free. We want to put our money to cash flow and other things. There are no great options for either startup, 6-year-old, 10-year-old companies to do all the things that you want to do, consolidate debt, to grow, to take risks that don't, I would say, put us in a position of being either knowingly exploited and extracted from or huge risk. The earliest, I will say, investors with less than honorable intentions sniffed around our business, which is, let's just say, privy to a lot of personal and health information for our clients, said, I see what you're building, I see what you're growing, and we want the data, which the kids say ick, gave all of us in the initial team a huge ick. I'm really glad that we've done things the hard way. Not every company can, right? And so I would just say, as you talked a bit about funding and Bern, to your point about how well is money used as a tool or an instrument, right? As a measure of its, utility, let's say. Terri, I guess it's sort of a question, maybe a conversation for another time. I think there's a huge gap, however, in supporting and having that larger sort of ecosystem environmental policy that supports these types of businesses. Because I talk to other people that, but for a lack of options in this space, which could be addressed by a low interest loan, like what the SBA is actually supposed to be, we are slowed down. We are put at risk of making decisions in contrast to the models that we're trying to build and sustain. And it's a conundrum that actually should be solvable, in my humble opinion. So that's little question disguised, speech disguised as a question, I'll say.
Yeah, I'll address it at high level, and then I'll be more than happy to talk to you offline. I went through the exact same thing when I jumped into this space. I overinvested. I estimated my ability to know how to do conscious business, and to strike the balance between purpose and profit, and went too heavy on the purpose side, yada, yada, yada. So we dug ourselves a hole more than once for the same reasons. And I will say unequivocally that there are businesses and funders that are looking for a way right now to solve that problem. I'm having discussions with them, and they recognize, with the administration taking the route that they're taking and how SBA is being obliterated, that we're going to need to find, and they want to fund conscious business models. So let's take that offline, and I can try to provide a little bit of hope there.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I mean, this was a lot more conversation than I'd expected, and you can see how many people are still on at 2:15. So wonderful community. And I wanted to thank you one more time for joining. Thank you, Terri, of course, for this insightful talk. And hopefully everybody who's from New York City or surroundings, I will see you on May 1st. More info to come your way. All right. Thanks, everyone. And have a
Thank
good
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.